Subscribe to my YouTube channel for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. The autumn leaves fell like forgotten promises outside the classroom window, and David Matthews couldn't help but steal another glance at the woman who had unknowingly changed his entire world. Mrs. Elena Reeves stood at the blackboard, her elegant fingers tracing equations that seemed to dance under her touch. But all David could focus on was the way the afternoon light caught the copper highlights in her dark hair dot at 22. David had returned to university after years of working construction to support his younger sister through high school. Advanced calculus wasn't supposed to be about the graceful curve of a teacher's neck all the way. Her voice carried a hint of sadness when she thought no one was listening. But here he was, 3 months into the semester, and every equation she wrote felt like a love letter he'd never be able to answer. Elena paused mid-sentence, her hand frozen against the board. She'd felt those eyes on her again, intense, unwavering, and filled with something that made her chest tighten with a dangerous warmth. At 31, she'd built walls around her heart after her divorce 2 years ago. But lately, those walls felt as fragile as morning frost. "Mr. Matthews," she said, without turning around, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. "Perhaps you'd like to solve this next problem." David's cheeks burned as he realized he'd been caught staring. Again. "Yes, ma'am." As he walked to the front of the class, Elena caught the faint scent of his cologne, something clean and masculine that made her remember she was still a woman, not just a teacher. She stepped aside to give him space, but their shoulders brushed, and for a moment that lasted an eternity, neither moved away. The problem on the board blurred before David's eyes. All he could think about was how close she stood, how her breathing had quickened just slightly, how wrong it was to want someone so completely out of reach. "Take your time," Elena whispered, and the gentleness in her voice nearly undid him. But David had always been quick with numbers, even when his heart was racing. He solved the equation with steady strokes, his handwriting bold and confident. As he set down the chalk, their eyes met, and in that moment, both knew they were solving for more than just X. The class ended with the usual shuffle of notebooks and backpacks. But David lingered, pretending to organize his papers. Elena busied herself erasing the board, though every stroke felt deliberate, buying time neither of them should want. "Mrs. Reeves?" David's voice was softer now, vulnerable in a way that made her heart ache. "I was wondering if you offer tutoring sessions." Eleanor's hand stilled on the eraser. She knew she should say no, refer him to the math center, maintain the professional distance that was already crumbling between them. But when she turned to face him, seeing the earnestness in his deep brown eyes, she found herself nodding. "Thursday evenings," she heard herself say. "The library closes at 8, but I have a key to the study rooms." David's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." As he walked away, Elena sank into her chair, wondering what she'd just agreed to. She told herself it was just tutoring, just helping a student who was genuinely struggling. But the way her pulse quickened when she thought about Thursday evening told a different story entirely. The days until Thursday crawled by with agonizing slowness. David found himself paying attention to details he'd never noticed before: the way Elena twisted her wedding ring when she was thinking, then seemed to catch herself and stop. The way she smiled at her students, warm and encouraging, but never quite reaching her eyes. The way she sometimes stood at the window during breaks, looking out at something only she could see. He'd learned from classmates that she'd been married to another professor, Dr. Richard Reeves from the English department. Their divorce had been quiet but thorough, and Elena had kept his name for professional reasons. David found himself wondering what kind of man would let someone like her slip away, then immediately felt guilty for the thought Elena, meanwhile, was fighting a battle she hadn't expected to face. She'd thrown herself into work after her divorce, finding solace in the predictability of numbers and the satisfaction of watching students grasp difficult concepts. But David Matthews had disrupted that carefully constructed peace. She noticed things about him too. How he always held doors for other students. How he'd helped Sarah Chan with her heavy textbooks when she'd sprained her wrist. How he worked construction jobs between classes to support his family. There was a maturity in him, a quiet strength that made her forget he was technically her student. Thursday evening arrived with a crisp October chill. Elena had stayed late in her office, grading papers and trying to convince herself this was just another tutoring session. She'd tutored dozens of students over the years. This would be no different. But when David knocked on the study room door at 6:30, her carefully constructed composure wavered. He'd changed out of his usual jeans and t-shirt into khakis and a button-down shirt that brought out the gold flecks in his eyes. His hair was still slightly damp from a shower, and he carried 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need caffeine," he said, offering her one of the cups. "It's from that little cafe on 5th Street. They said it was your usual order." Elena accepted the coffee, her fingers brushing his as she took the cup. "You asked about my usual order." David's cheeks reddened. Yes. I wanted to get it right." The small gesture touched her more than it should have. Richard had never once brought her coffee in all their years together, had never paid attention to such details. She pushed the thought away and gestured to the chairs arranged around the small table. "Shall we begin with derivatives?" For the first hour, they maintained the pretense of a normal tutoring session. Elena explained concepts with her usual patience, and David absorbed the information with impressive focus. But as the evening wore on, their conversation began to drift beyond calculus. "You're different from other students," Elena found herself saying as they worked through a particularly complex problem. "Most people your age are eager to graduate and move on. You seem to genuinely love learning." David looked up from his notebook. "I think I just appreciate the opportunity more because I almost didn't get it. When my parents died in that car accident 5 years ago, I thought college was over for me. I had to take care of my sister, make sure she finished high school. Sometimes the things you have to fight for mean more." Eleanor's heart clenched. She'd known he was older than the typical student, but she hadn't known about his parents, about the responsibility he'd shouldered so young. "I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult." It was, but it taught me not to take things for granted. Like this. He gestured around the quiet study room. "Having the chance to sit here with someone who's brilliant and patient and ... He stopped himself, realizing he was about to cross a line. "And what?" Elena asked softly. David met her eyes, and she saw the struggle there. The desire to speak warring with the knowledge that some words, once said, couldn't be taken back. "And beautiful," he finished quietly. "I know I shouldn't say that. I know it's inappropriate. But it's true." Eleanor's breath caught. She should have corrected him, should have reminded him about boundaries and professional conduct. Instead, she found herself studying his face, the strong jawline, the honest eyes, the way his mouth curved when he was concentrating. "David," she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. The air between them crackled with tension. David leaned forward slightly, and Elena didn't pull away. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them in the warm circle of lamplight, surrounded by equations that suddenly seemed far less important than the mathematics of heartbeats and breathing. Then Eleanor's phone buzzed, jarring them back to reality. She glanced at it automatically and saw a text from her sister asking about weekend plans. The mundane message was enough to break the spell, and she quickly stood, putting distance between them. "I think that's enough for tonight," she said, her voice unsteady. David nodded, gathering his things with shaking hands. "Mrs. Reeves, I'm sorry if I—" "Don't apologize," Elena interrupted. "Just ... this can't happen again. You understand that, don't you?" David's eyes held hers for a long moment. "I understand what you're saying. Whether I understand why is a different question." After he left, Elena sat alone in the study room, her head in her hands. She'd built her life on logic and reason, on clear boundaries and professional conduct. But David Matthews was making her question everything she thought she knew about herself. The next few weeks passed in a careful dance of avoidance. Elena threw herself into her work, taking on extra committee assignments and staying late to grade papers. David attended class but sat in the back row, his eyes focused on his notebook, rather than on her. They were both trying to pretend that Thursday evening had never happened, that the memory hung between them like a song neither could forget. It was Dr. Patricia Huang, Elena's colleague and closest friend, who finally confronted her. They were having coffee in the faculty lounge on a grey November afternoon when Patricia set down her cup and fixed Elena with a knowing look. "You've been miserable for weeks," Patricia said without preamble. "What's going on?" Elena stirred her. "Coffee unnecessarily. I don't know what you mean." "Elena, we've been friends for 6 years. I know when something's eating at you. Is it about Richard? Did he contact you?" "No, it's not Richard." Elena paused, then sighed. "It's complicated." Patricia leaned forward. "Complicated how? Is there someone you're interested in?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena had always been able to talk to Patricia about anything, but this felt different. Dangerous. "There's someone," she admitted finally. "But it's impossible. Completely inappropriate." "Married?" "No." "Involved with someone else?" "No." Patricia frowned. "Then what makes it inappropriate?" "Elena, you're 31, divorced, and you haven't shown interest in anyone since Richard. If there's someone who makes you happy, he's my student," Elena said quietly. The words seemed to echo in the small lounge. Patricia's eyes widened, and Elena immediately regretted her honesty. "Oh, Elena," Patricia said softly. "How old?" 22. "He's not a traditional student. He's been working for years, supporting his family. But still, he's your student," Patricia finished. "And you're in a position of authority over him." Elena nodded miserably. "I know it's wrong. I know it could destroy my career, my reputation. But Patricia, I can't stop thinking about him. When I'm with him, I feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. He sees me not just as a teacher or someone's ex-wife, but as a woman, as myself." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," Elena said firmly. "I'm going to do nothing. The semester ends in 3 weeks. After that, he won't be my student anymore. Maybe then ... Maybe then what?" Elena shook her head. "I don't know. I just know I can't keep living in this limbo." But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. The next afternoon, Elena was walking to her car after a late faculty meeting when she heard shouting from the parking lot. She turned to see David backing away from a larger man who was gesturing angrily. Even from a distance, she could hear words like money and consequences. Without thinking, Elena hurried toward them. As she got closer, she could see the tension in David's shoulders, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. The other man, who looked to be in his 40s with greying hair and an expensive suit, was clearly agitated. "David?" Elena called out, "Is everything all right?" The older man turned toward her, his expression calculating. "And you are?" "I'm his professor," Elena said, moving to stand beside David. She could feel the tension radiating from him, could see the muscle ticking in his jaw. "Professor," the man said with a cold smile. "How interesting. I'm Marcus Webb, David's business partner. We were just discussing some financial obligations." Elena felt David tense beside her. "I told you, Marcus, I need more time. I'm not dropping out. Time is a luxury you can't afford," Marcus replied. "You owe me $15,000. And I'm not a patient man. You can make that up in construction in 3 months if you quit playing college boy." Eleanor's heart sank as she began to understand. David had borrowed money, probably for his sister's education or family expenses. And now this man was demanding payment. "There has to be another way," Elena found herself saying. "David is an excellent student. He's so close to finishing his degree." Marcus's smile turned predatory. "Are you offering to pay his debt, Professor? Because that would solve everything." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm simply saying that education is an investment in the future. Surely you can work out a payment plan." "The only plan that interests me is full payment, by Friday." Marcus turned back to David. "Think about it carefully. Your sister's future depends on your choices." With that, he walked away, leaving Elena and David standing in the nearly empty parking lot. The silence stretched between them until David finally spoke. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," he said quietly. "This isn't your problem." "David, what was he talking about?" "Your sister's future." David ran a hand through his hair, looking older than his 22 years. "I borrowed money from him 2 years ago when Emma needed surgery. Insurance didn't cover everything and I was desperate. I thought I could pay it back gradually, but the interest..." He shook his head. "I've been paying him for 2 years, and I still owe $15,000. Elena felt sick. "What happens if you can't pay?" "He's made it clear that Emma's college scholarship could disappear. He has connections at her school, knows people who could make her life very difficult." David's voice was bitter. "So I'll do what I have to do. I'll drop out, go back to construction full-time, and pay off the debt." "No," Elena said firmly. "You can't do that. You're too close to finishing." David looked at her with a mixture of affection and frustration. "Elena, I don't have a choice. Some things are more important than a degree." The use of her first name, spoken so naturally, sent a shiver through her. "There has to be another way." "Like what?" "You heard him. He wants $15,000 by Friday. I don't have that kind of money, and I don't know anyone who does." Elena's mind raced. She thought about her savings account, about the settlement money from her divorce that she'd been keeping for emergencies. $15,000 would make a significant dent, but it wouldn't wipe her out entirely. "I could lend you the money," she said before she could stop herself. David stared at her. "Elena, no. I can't let you do that." "Why not?" "I have savings. I don't need it right now, and you could pay me back after you graduate, when you get a job in your field." "Because," David said, stepping closer to her, "we both know this isn't just about money. You helping me like this, it changes things between us. It makes this real." Eleanor's heart pounded. Maybe it's already real. They stood facing each other in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the ordinary world of cars and campus buildings, but feeling as though they were balanced on the edge of a cliff. Elena knew that offering him money would cross a line she'd never crossed before. It would make her complicit in something that went far beyond the bounds of their professional relationship. That looking at David's face, seeing the conflict there, desire to accept her help warring with his pride, and his concern for her reputation. She realized she'd already made her choice. "Let me help you," she said softly. "Please." David searched her eyes, and she saw the moment he stopped fighting. What was happening between them? "If I accept this," he said quietly, "you know we can't go back to pretending there's nothing between us." "I know," Elena whispered. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth, could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I care about you, Elena. More than I should. More than is safe for either of us." Her breath caught. "David... I know all the reasons why this is wrong. I know about the ethics, about your career, about what people would say. But I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "I care about you too. But this is so complicated." "It doesn't have to be," David said, reaching up to touch her face gently. "After the semester ends, I won't be your student anymore. We could... We could what?" Elena asked, though her heart was already answering. "We could see where this goes. We could be honest about what we feel, instead of pretending it doesn't exist." Elena closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "My career, my reputation. I would never do anything to hurt you," David said fiercely. "Never. If you want to keep this quiet, if you want to take things slowly, I'll respect that. But Elena, please don't ask me to pretend I don't love you." The words hit her like a physical blow. Love. He loved her. And standing there in the parking lot, with his hand warm against her cheek, and his eyes so full of sincerity, she realized she loved him too. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Maybe," David agreed. "But sometimes the best things are." Elena opened her eyes and looked at him, really. Looked at him. She saw the man who'd worked construction to support his sister, who'd come back to school to build a better life, who'd been willing to sacrifice his own dreams to protect someone he loved. She saw strength and integrity and a kind of love she'd never experienced before. "Friday," she said finally. "I'll have the money on Friday." David's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Thank you for everything." As they walked to their cars, Elena felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She was about to lend a significant amount of money to a student she was falling in love with, crossing professional boundaries she'd never imagined breaking. But for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. The rest of the week passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Elena arranged to withdraw the money from her savings account, telling herself she was simply helping a student in need. But late at night, alone in her apartment, she allowed herself to imagine what might happen after the semester ended. Could they really make this work? Could love overcome the complications of their situation? Friday afternoon arrived with winter's first snowfall, delicate flakes that seemed to transform the campus into something magical. Elena met David at the same cafe where he'd learned her coffee order, carrying an envelope that felt heavier than its contents should have warranted. "Are you sure about this?" David asked as she handed him the envelope. "I'm sure," Elena said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Just... Be careful. Men like Marcus Webb don't usually operate within the bounds of what's legal." David nodded, pocketing the envelope without opening it. "I'll pay you back. Every penny with interest." "I'm not worried about the money," Elena said softly. Their eyes met across the small table, and in that moment, both knew they were talking about more than just a loan. They were talking about trust, about faith, about the willingness to risk everything for the possibility of something beautiful. 3 more weeks, David said quietly. "Then the semester ends." 3 more weeks, Elena agreed. As they parted ways, Elena felt a mixture of hope and fear that would stay with her for the rest of the semester. She'd made her choice, crossed her line, And now all she could do was wait to see if love really could conquer all the obstacles in their path. The snow continued to fall as she walked back to her office. And Elena found herself thinking about second chances, about the courage it takes to let someone into your heart when you've been hurt before. She'd given David more than money, she'd given him her trust, her hope, and whether she was ready to admit it or not, her heart. Only time would tell if she'd made the right choice. And as she watched the snow cover the campus in pristine white, Elena allowed herself to believe that sometimes, just sometimes, love really was worth the risk. The story of Elena and David was far from over. In fact, as the winter deepened and the semester drew to a close, they would both discover that their greatest challenges and their greatest joys were still ahead of them.